Little round of applause. So I know that Adi here is a fan of cricket, I heard.
Yes, very much so.
So do you play yourself, or?
I played for about 40 years. From being a small boy, I think I retired a few years ago.
So you're more of a cricket player than a tester, I understand.
I've been playing cricket a lot longer than I've been testing.
Good. So, accessibility, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Hello everybody. This talk came about because I went to Test Bash with the Ministry of Testing in Manchester, and they do what's called 99-second talks. And I've been learning about accessibility for quite a while, so I wanted to use an example to make people think differently about accessibility. So that's what I'm going to do over the next 25-30 minutes or so, is try and make you think differently about accessibility. So, I know this is the last slot before lunch. I know people are probably hungry, hopefully not hungry. And you can bear with me for a little while. So if you're able, I'd like you to stand up, please. So, this is what I did in my 99-second talk. I asked people to stand up, and I said to them, I'm going to ask 4 questions, and if this question applies to you, sit down. Is that okay? So, question number 1. Do you use glasses or contact lenses to enhance your vision to do your work? If you do, to go. That usually gets about 3rd. So, when you've been on a tablet or a phone or a website, have you ever had to zoom in to read something because the print's quite small on your mobile phones? If you have, sit down. Right, does anybody have one of those funky keyboard or vertical bounces that's slightly different from the normal ones you get at home or at work to use? So we've got a few people left, so the last one. Oh, what's happened? Oh, wrong thing. So the last one, when you're in a pub or a bar, or you're carrying shopping, or you have a small baby, have you ever used a device with one hand and found it a bit awkward? Have you ever used that device with one hand? So this is good. I've got this is perfect. I have one person left. So when we design software, if we don't think about accessibility, the one person who was left is the person we're designing that software for. We're not thinking about all the different ways we use software, all the different locations we use software, all the different circumstances we use software. If we think that way, then we're thinking about not only people using it, but we're thinking about people with different abilities and disabilities using it. So somebody with a motor syndrome who can't keep the hand still, trying to press a button is very similar if you're on public transport, on a bus or a train, and you're trying, while everything's moving around, you're trying to hit the button. It's very similar. So if I go back, usually I start my talk, it's assumptions and arguments. So I will talk about some common assumptions with accessibility that I came across, and then I'll give you some arguments to try and do more where you work, and then I'll introduce some test techniques. So, accessibility issues only affect a small number of users. So hopefully that assumption has now been blown out the water because pretty much everybody sat down. I started testing a website in beginning of 2015. And one of the things I was given responsibility for was to look into accessibility, how it would affect building the website, what we needed to do. And that's why I've sort of started this talk, because a lot of people I talked to, they didn't talk about accessibility, they weren't thinking about accessibility. So I like I said, I'm getting out here and doing things to try and raise awareness and make people think differently. Sorry, I've got out of sequence, so I'll get past that. So, glasses make text accessible and readable. It's exactly the same if you have low vision and you have poor contrast on your website. People with low vision will struggle to see it. It's making the contrast decent enough for everybody. It's just like putting a pair of glasses on. Zooming to 200% is a web content accessibility guideline, and I'll mention WCAG, or the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, a couple of times during this talk. Non-traditional keyboards and mouse their use is very similar to assistive technology. So somebody who's blind use a different type of keyboard to read. They might use Braille or they might use a screen reader. And if you Google a demonstration of somebody using a screen reader, they're talking about 12 times as fast as I'm talking now. So reading a web page, they whiz through it because that's their only way of interacting with a site or on their mobile, and it goes through really quickly. It'll blow your mind. It'll completely change how you view the internet if you look at a demonstration. And then, as I said, using technology with one hand, whether it be a tablet or a mobile phone, it's a situational incapacity. So I use my phone quite a lot because I have a pint in my hand. We had some lovely drinks on a boat last night for the speaker's dinner, which was very nice. So tweeting about being on a boat, wobbling about with a pint in my hand, it made it quite tricky. But that was the situation. So it's very similar to if somebody just has one arm. Microsoft do a series of what they call inclusive design principles, and I think I've got a slide on that coming up. But they show different disabilities affect people in situations, or it could be temporary. So I think they have somebody with one arm, they have somebody with a broken arm, and they have somebody holding a baby. So they're very similar situations. But the number one assumption when I was, like I said, I've been looking into this over 4 years. The number one assumption is that accessibility features are only for those people with disabilities. And they do help people with disabilities, but they help a lot more people. If you design accessibility into your sites or you're testing for accessibility, then you're making it more usable, you're making it more user-friendly, people will be able to do things better. But I've tried to summarise this when I talk to people. Don't think about accessibility as for people with disabilities. Think about it as inclusion. Excuse me. So the better your site is from an accessibility point of view, the more inclusive it is, the more people can use it, the more people can read it. This is the example I was talking about from the Microsoft Inclusive Design Toolkit. As I said previously, all these slides will be sent out, and at the end I have a number of links to the different things I'll mention here. So I mentioned a couple of tools at the end, and this guideline is like in a PDF format that you can download. It's got lots of good information. There's these sorts of examples for different things. Excuse me. So, getting on to some more common assumptions. Lots of people assume that if you're making your site more accessible or you're putting accessibility options in there, it's going to cost you an awful lot of money. If you design accessibility from the beginning, then it's just a design choice. It's not actually going to cost you any more money, you're just making a choice of design. If you have a well-established website or application that hasn't ever thought about accessibility, then yes, it's going to have a cost associated, but it's like refactoring your code if you want to add a new feature or you want to do something differently with it. Hopefully, number two, it affects a small number of people. I hope we've moved past that now. It's only for people with disabilities, and it's very complicated. If you are designing a website and you're writing code to make it more difficult, to make it more accessible, there are things like ARIA labels that you have to consider and different things like that. I'm not an accessibility expert. I don't write code. I've worked quite hard to read code so I can pair with developers and follow logic in code, but I don't write it. I couldn't start with a blank page and I could probably do Hello World. Probably do that. Excuse me. But it's like any subject. If you started looking into security testing, you'll think it's very complicated, it's a whole world, but there are low-hanging fruits that everybody can understand and everybody can use. It's the same with accessibility. There are lots of things that everybody can do and everybody can think about while they're using it. Put your mouse to one side. When you're testing your application, just use a keyboard. You are then testing as an accessibility persona. Like I said, there's lots of easy things to do. So inclusive principle, if you take nothing away from this talk, take that website. Inclusive Design Principles is a great site for explaining how you can make things more accessible, how you can design things with accessibility in mind. And the Inclusive Design Principles, there's a lot of text on the screen. Now, Barclays Bank did try to make an image. It's not my favourite image, because I think there's far too many words on it. So it's not the great slide, but this will give you an idea about the principles. So it's put the person in charge of your site, whoever's using it, they should be driving it. You shouldn't be making them jump over. Don't put pop-ups on your site that cover everything you were just reading. That's really annoying. And most of those are not accessible to people with screen readers. It just becomes a noise because a lot of those come up as images and they don't have alt text. And so I'm rambling on now. So these are the inclusive design principles. And it's like, consider situation. And if you look through these, they very rarely mention anybody with a disability. It's very rarely for people who are disabled or have different inabilities or abilities to use sites or applications. It's very much situational. So consider the situation. If you have low contrast on your screen and you're outside and the sun's shining, it's very hard. We've all done it. We've all moved his phone up and down to try and get the glare out of it so we can see what we're doing. Well, you could make your site even worse by the choices you make in designs and colours and things like that. So it's very important that all the way through, I mean, as testers, one of the main things we do is thinking about things from different perspectives or how people might use it. So nobody will ever do that on your site and then it crashes because you thought nobody'd ever do it and they'd use it in a different way than you were thinking. So a couple of facts here. I do a UK version of this, but the figures are massive when you talk about the EU. And yes, I'm from England and we are still part of the EU for the moment, so I feel fine talking about this. So around 80 million people are affected by a disability to some degree. So again, it's not a small number of users. There are estimated to be over 30 million blind and partially sighted people. Again, these are not small numbers. 30 million people is larger than the population of quite a lot of countries in Europe. So you can see the round. And accessibility is not, it's about content. Sorry about that. It's about the content you use. So 37% of the EU, age 15 and over, reported moderate or severe physical or sensory limitations. That's in vision, in seeing, in sight, in mobility and stuff like that. So you can look at these. These are figures from the European Blind Union and Eurostat. These figures are widely available. And again, it's not a small number of users. It's like the numbers are massive. And if you include everybody in a situation, everybody has accessibility issues. 1 in 5 of us will be affected by disability at some point in our lives. So that's every 5th person in this room is going to have something that affects them, whether it's a light effect or a big effect. And the key for me there is 8 out of 10 people with a disability weren't born with it. Something's happened, some incident, some accident, whatever it might be, that's changed the perception. So that can happen to any of us. Like I say, situational, we can break a bone. That situation might lead to an amputation. So we change. Life is change. Today we're in one situation, tomorrow something might happen that makes us completely different. So if we're thinking in broader terms, it's not just about me, it's about all of us. You might have seen some news reports about facial recognition recently, about whether to use it and whether we should be using it and things like that. Well, the first instance of facial recognition was born out of work done in Silicon Valley in the US, and it was the majority of people who worked on it were Caucasian, they were male, and so when they first roll it out to the world, people with Asian faces couldn't use that technology because they tested it with white Caucasian males. So, it works on my face. They hadn't considered all the different faces that exist in the world. So you could say that's an accessibility issue. It's definitely a problem that they were only thinking for a small subset of people in the world. And again, as testers, we should be thinking about everybody, not just a small group. We might have a target demographic. We might want to target a section of people to sell them things or to get them to use our services. But that subsection of people could be very diverse, different colours, different cultures, different backgrounds. So again, we need to think about everybody while we're doing things. I think this is the final slide on this. 55 million adults have literacy difficulties in the EU. That's, I'm not really clear. Are you familiar with the term reading age? So sometimes it's defined in school years, sometimes it's by their years of education. But generally people who develop software have some form of higher education, whether that be degrees or they've been on courses or they've been on computer science things. So we understand a lot more complicated language. A lot of our users won't have been through that thing, so we need to think about the language we use, terminologies. I did a workshop at my work on assumptions, and I put the letters STD on the screen, and I got people to write down what they thought that acronym stood for. And we had everything. The one that jumps to mind most often is sexually transmitted disease. But we had everything from that to standard. So STD means different things to different people in different contexts. So if you're using acronyms on your site, make sure it's at least defined the first time you use it, even if you want to continue doing it. It'll help people. So to summarise sort of what I've said so far, accessibility is for everybody. It's not for a small number of people. We all have accessibility problems in different situations. And it's not just about functional. So I've come up with, I like a visual image. I've created something called the periodic table of testing, so it's a big visual heuristic. You can look it up afterwards if you want. But I do like a good visual image. So I came up with what I call the Accessibility Quadrants, or Accessible Software Quadrants. I keep playing with the name, I keep changing it. It's a work in progress. But you not only have compliance, which a lot of people only talk about accessibility in terms of whether they're compliant to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, but you've also got things how readable your site is, how usable your site is, and what language you choose to use. I did a certified Agile tester course last year, and they talk about an Agile tester in an Agile environment, and gone are the days of big upfront documents, but they gave us a binder like year thick, which was a big upfront document to teach us how to not use big upfront documents, so I thought that was a bit strange. But when you read through the book, they, on a couple of occasions, referred to the product owner as he instead of they, so they were making an assumption that product owners were male. And you see this in language all over the place. If a woman writes text, they'll quite often say she. If a man writes a text, they'll quite often say he. There's no reason why we can't just say they. So that includes everybody. So inclusive language is something that we should be considering. Think about they and them instead of he and she, unless you're being very specific and there's a reason behind it. So just to go into a little bit more detail, in terms of readability, simple language, not everybody has higher education. Acronyms, if you have to use them, it's better if you don't, but if you have to use them, at least define it the first time you use it so people are very clear on what you're doing. The third one's quite important from an actual accessibility point of view. So I've seen websites where they want to shout at you and they have everything in capital letters. If you use a screen reader and you come across something that's all capital letters, the screen reader will generally assume that it's an acronym and it will lead all the letters out individually. So you can imagine a whole page full of text where the person who can't see the page, who's listening to it through a screen reader, is having to listen to every word, every letter individually, then work out what the word was, and then tie it into the next. It's just painful. So capital letters, if you have to use them, think about how you use them, think about how people's going to react with them, and give clear instructions. If you want people to do things in a certain way on your site, make it really clear you want them to do that. Don't assume. Everybody here will have filled a form in on a page. Everybody will have hit submit and it doesn't submit. Quite often, especially if you're on a mobile device, it's really hard to work out what you've done wrong because the error message is like 3 pages up on a phone. So make it clear. If it's something's wrong, jump to it or put a summary of what the errors are. Again, that makes it more usable for everybody, but particularly people with screen readers, it makes it really simple for them to work out what they need to do to get the form to submit. So in terms of usability, these are good design principles. They help with accessibility, but they're just good design principles. That's done what it did before, it's jumped, there we go. Oh no, it hasn't. So inclusive language. I won't spend a lot of time on doing this, but one of the things I like to do as part of my testing is I try to think of everybody and I try to have empathy for people who are using our software. I use it every day, so I know where all the shortcuts are, I know how to do things quickly. I can sign in on my site in seconds, whereas somebody who's new to it, I can register it. I can register very quickly because I know what information's on the screen. Don't assume everybody's like that. Think about different people in different situations doing it. I like to use, we have some real devices for testing on our site. There's a bus that goes into town and back on a dinner time. Sometimes I get on the bus and I go testing on our site on the bus because it's a different situation and it's mimicking somebody in a real life situation who might be doing it on the way to work or on the way home from work on public transport or something like that. It's just a different way of testing. It's a different way of getting alternative feedback on your site. So from a compliance point of view, it's becoming more and more important that we adhere to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. In the UK, all government sites must now reach at least level AA. So there are 3 levels, A, AA, and AAA. I don't know why they made it so complicated. A bit A, B, C would be easy, wouldn't it? Or 1, 2, 3. But we have to go for the middle ground. The Web Content Accessibility Guidelines have been around since 2008. So when they were first written, and they only got updated last year. So for 10 years, they were written just as the first iPhone came out. So they weren't really considering tablets and mobile devices. So they've had an upgrade to 2.1 recently, where there's 12 new guidelines have come out, are all around all around mobile devices and using it on the move. Oh, it moved. Sorry. So using language that assumes who the users are or how they will engage with the content is an accessibility issue. And again, that's from an inclusion point of view. There's really no reason to think that. Do we all agree there's more than 2 genders? People can identify however they wish, so we shouldn't assume that there are only 2. If you have a title option on your page and it just says Mr. or Mrs. or Miss, there's a lot more titles than that. So do you really need it? Do you really need to ask what sex they are if you want to sell them a lamp? There's some very weird forms out there, and they're all from when we had manual forms 20, 30 years ago. The world has moved on. The world is more inclusive now. It has I don't think it has a wider range of people, but I think we have more knowledge about the range of different types of people that are out there. So let's think about everybody. Let's cater to everybody. So there's a really good website called shouldiuseacarousel.com. Carousels are the #1 accessibility killers in the world because they're usually designed to look good, not to be used. Usually they either spin too fast, so you can't actually read what's on the carousel. If you're using a keyboard only, it's really hard to tab on it because it moves, and then where's the tab? Where are you on the page? You don't know. From a screen reader point of view, there's a demo online about somebody trying to read a carousel with a screen reader, and even at 10 times as fast as I'm speaking, it's too fast because there's far too many words on each of the carousel pictures. But go on shouldiuseacarousel.com. There is a carousel, and each slide, which moves too quickly, has words like these, explaining exactly why you shouldn't use it. So it's a fun little site. It'll take you like 2-3 minutes to go through the whole site because it's literally 7 or 8 images, but it is quite funny. So, accessibility is complicated. Everything's complicated if it's unknown, but if you start delving into things, there's little things you can do to start understanding how accessible your website is or looking at it from a different point of view. The first thing I did when I was getting into accessibility testing was I moved my mouse to one side and I just went through all the tests I would normally do just using the keyboard. I tend to do that. Different days I'll do different things. So one day I'll do any testing I'm doing with the screen reader. Now even though I can see the screen, any issues with labels, anything that comes up, we're all testing more than one thing when we're interacting with something because we're looking at the functional side of it, how it looks, how it feels, what the flow feels like, whether it's usable. So this is just another way of introducing an extra This is just another way of introducing an extra step by doing something slightly differently. So by doing something slightly differently, we're doing another type of testing. So don't think that you have to run out and you have to go through all 50-odd steps of the web content accessibility background checklist immediately to find everything about your site in every dimension. Pick one or two. So if you have a site or applications and there is images on them, do they all have alternative text so that somebody with a screen reader can understand what that image is there for? Does it add anything to the experience of the user? There's a story. One of the biggest awards that's ever been given for an accessibility law case was against a company called Target, which is like a big supermarket chain in America. And online they had a sale. And the only way they identified them was with a little circular image in the top right-hand corner that said sale, but it had no alternative text on it. So people with screen readers knew there was something there but had no idea what it was. So they were sued, and the person who sued them was awarded $6 million because they had no alternative text. That alternative text was 4 letters, and it would have saved them $6 million. So it's very small things can have very big impacts. So, a common argument I've heard people say is accessibility is hard. I've said it a couple of times now, everything new is hard. You get a brand new phone, it has different features in different places, it takes you a few days to play with it, to understand how you do things. It takes you 5 minutes to make your fingerprint acknowledge. If you've got facial recognition, it might take you a little while to set that up because it has to scan you different times. Anything new can be hard, but when something's worth it, it's worth us pushing on, and it's worth us finding out about this. This is worth it. This will not only make your website better for lots of different people, it will also increase your value as a tester because you have knowledge and accessibility. In an ideal world, you'll all go away and you'll all be an advocate for accessibility wherever you work, and you'll be saying, why aren't we doing more of this? Why aren't we doing it? I can't guarantee that, but you make my day if you go away and you're asking questions like that at your company. So it's hard, but it's even harder for users if we don't do these things. People who come to your site, reputation is a very big thing in software and for companies. If people are saying your site's inaccessible online, that can get shared, that can affect your revenue. So one of the arguments you can use is, if we don't do this, how much money are we losing? Rather than, it's going to cost us money to do something extra. So what I think is the number one argument that you can use at your work, it's got to be the right thing to do, hasn't it? All my presentations, since like I said, I'm sort of like preaching now, saying you must do this, but up to 2015 I didn't do a lot of this. But all my presentations now, all my images have alt text on them. It's not a white background, it's 5% grey, so that it's not too bright for people. So I make sure my contrast is good. I put my contact details on everyone, so if somebody takes a picture, they can reference where it came from or what they're doing. So all my presentations are more accessible. So again, arguments for, it's going to cost you money. If you're removing barriers to people interacting with your site, that means they're more likely to stay, they're more likely to take your services, they're more likely to buy things if you're in retail. The more people you can get on your site and doing things, the more valuable your site's going to become. And did I mention it's the right thing to do? I think I mentioned it was the right thing to do. Pretty sure I did, but just in case, it's definitely the right thing to do. So, talking of cost and reputation and revenue, there's then legal things to consider. So from a legal standpoint, there are more and more lawsuits and people being sued because of accessibility issues. I mentioned Target earlier. Domino's website recently got sued, and I think the person who sued them was awarded something like $2.53 million. I think that's a lot of money for not getting a pizza. But that might just be me. I mean, I think it's more about punishing the company than for the individual, but I don't know. It seems like an awful lot. Like, usually they're like $9.99 or something like that. I don't know in euros, it might be $11.99. But there are European Accessibility Acts. There are, in the UK, we have the People with Disabilities Act. In the EU, there's legislation about inclusion and not making people with disabilities excluded from things. Lots of buildings now have ramps or lifts to get people into them. We're globally thinking more inclusively. And if you're not, at some point along the way, you are going to get punished, whether that's reputationally because people are having a go at you online, whether that's losing revenue because people are walking away from your website or your application. It's definitely one of those things. And I mentioned just when I had a brief chat at the start, when people talk about the future of testing, they talk about machine learning and they talk about artificial intelligence. I've been in testing a long while. I've seen multiple cycles of testing is dead for reasons. A while ago it was testing is dead because automation is now a thing. Then it was testing is dead because AI is going to take your job. Part of the future of testing is those things, but it's also going to be accessibility, because I can see it not being too far in the future where everything has to be compliant. So if you're doing those steps now, if you're thinking about it today, that's not going to be a problem in the future where you have to redesign your whole website. You can make little incremental changes over time. That was on the BBC News. Its app must be made fully accessible to blind people. In America is where the majority of these sort of legal cases are going through, and over the years, a lot of them have been settled out of court with small payments, but judges, Europe, the UK and America are now saying, no, your site should be compliant. And once one judge somewhere in the world says, no, you have a legal obligation to be compliant, that then becomes a precedent, and every other case that comes after it is going to reference that case saying, well, that judge said you should be compliant, so why aren't you compliant? So it's going to be one of those situations where in the near future you're going to be seeing more cases like this, that people who are just ignoring this or choose not to, because I did mention it's the right thing to do, didn't I? I think I mentioned that. So it's definitely the right thing to do. So these are a few of the different rulings that have got on. I mentioned Target. Winn-Dixie, which was a grocery store, that had, I think it was $500,000 awarded for, and been ordered to comply with the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. There are 1,200. That figure I last checked that figure 3 weeks ago, so it could be quite a lot more by now. But there are currently in America 1,200 lawsuits from all over the world going through American courts that Apple's Macs applications and phones aren't accessible. Apple are really good at accessibility. If any phone really, but if you've got an iPhone, put it in accessibility mode. but Google how to turn it off easily first, because if you turn it on and you've not checked how to turn it off, you will really struggle. It works very much, it's focused on people with visual difficulties. So it has a built-in screen reader, so it'll read you things, but the way you interact with is like we normally use one finger to tap around. This uses 2 and 3 finger taps in different directions to use the functionality. It's really interesting. You'll learn, literally, you'll get, again, like Googling somebody using a screen reader, you'll get a completely different experience of interacting with different sites and technologies in the web by using accessibility modes. And again, it's not going to cost you any money. We've all got phones in our pockets. They all have accessibility settings. All you have to do is turn them on and try. So I think I might have already covered this, because I tend to do slides and then talk out of in different orders when I do talks. So this is the image that I put up earlier about situational, temporary and permanent disabilities. So as I said, all my slides have been done so that they're accessible to everybody. So in PowerPoint, you just go to Format Picture. There's an alt text box and you can type in what's in the picture. But to put this into context, it doesn't have to be exactly what is in the image. So the example that I've heard before that I think is the best one, if you have an image of a load of trees, and there are 13 different types, and some are young saplings and some are really tall ones, and it covers a hillside, you can just say forest, because the forest is the image you're giving people, and it will make sense in the context of however you've used it. So you don't have to describe every tree and every leaf and every branch. You don't have to say whether it's daylight or whether it's nighttime. If in the context of using an image, it's to have an image of a forest, just make sure your alt text says forest. Another easy tip that you can look at is hyperlinks. So pretty much every website and application has a link, has navigation to take you from one place to another place. The worst thing you can do is, if you want to know about this, click here, because screen readers can just list all the links. And if all you put is click here, then that's what a screen reader is going to tell somebody. Why am I clicking here? Where am I going to go? What's the point of any of this? So again, these are not things you need tools for. These are not things you need lots of learning. It's not complicated to see if an image has alt text. It's not complicated to just use a keyboard. It's not complicated to check your links actually tell you where they're going. These are all things we can do tomorrow or the day after, whenever you're back at work. These are all things we can do. They all make little small improvements to your site. They all make it easier for everybody. So, start talking about accessibility. Inclusive design is very important. Empathy and inclusion. Be an advocate for these things. Go back to work, start a conversation on accessibility, even if it's why have we never considered it. It will give you another dimension as a tester, it will make your site better, and it will, I don't think I'm overgeneralizing, it will help the world. There will be somebody out there who uses whatever it is you're testing and will be thankful it's easy to use because you asked a question back here. If you take one name away from today's talk, let it be Hayden Pickering. He's one of the foremost world leaders on inclusive design and inclusive components. You don't even have to reinvent the wheel or find out how to do this, because Hayden's built a website that has snippets of code that are inclusive components. You can literally copy and paste it. He doesn't mind, that's why he did the website. He wants everything to be more usable and more accessible. So he's got a website full of different components that you can just take and include in your website. You don't have to refactor, you don't have to work it out, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can just take that information and use it however you wish. So, that's about the end of my talk. Hopefully, I've given you a different perspective on accessibility. Hopefully you will now all go away and be accessibility advocates wherever you work. And in 2 or 3 or 4 years, I won't need to give this talk anymore because everybody will be talking or thinking about accessibility as the future of testing. Thank you very much.
So we have time for a question or two. So is there any? Yeah.
So, as I said, these slides will be up on SlideShare and they'll send it out. There's a load of links to all the resources that I mentioned.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for the presentation. I have a quick question. You spoke about the importance of gender neutral when writing on the websites because there's all sorts of users. Have you ever come across a situation where on a different language, such as a Latin language, everything is male or female, even an object, so there's no gender neutral basically?
Yeah, so all my experience is with the English language. I'll make no apologies for that, I come from the UK. But I do know in different languages around the world there are different gender labels, but most of them have some form of neutral they or them that you can use. Not everyone, but most of them. If it's inherent in the language, you can basically put a brackets at the side of it or put an explanation at the bottom saying this is our only choice. So you can be inclusive by pointing out where you can't be. So I have seen that on different sites around the world. They literally have a caveat at the bottom saying we've had to use this type of language, but that's one way of doing it. Hello.
Hello. I have a question. Have you tried Lighthouse or something similar to see a website's accessibility score?
Yeah, I use quite a number of add-ons to browsers and tools. So there's one called Wave, which is the Web Accessibility Evaluation Tool. That literally overlays your website with things it thinks might be wrong. You get quite a few false positives. So it tells you this might be a problem, and experience will work out if it is or it isn't. But there's even developer tools. If you press F12 on a keyboard, the developer tools pop up. Most of those now have an accessibility section, and there are other extensions. There's one called Axe that extends the number of tests that the accessibility developer bit does. So you can literally click a button and it'll do an accessibility assessment of your website. The danger with those tools is that only about 40% of accessibility testing can be automated. So it will make sure that you can tab to everywhere on a page. It won't tell you if that tabbing makes sense in the order that it's done, and it won't tell you if there's what's called a keyboard trap. So that's when you tab through a page and you go into a side little route, but there's no way back out. So usually it's Alt-Tab gets you back. So in a keyboard trap, there's literally no way out except to refresh the page and go back to the start and try not to go in it next time. Is that okay? Thank you.
So thank you, Adi, for a very interesting talk.
Oh, thank you very much.
So we have also a little
thank you.
Little gift for you. It will help you with the accessibility testing, because I know this kit includes kind of a
cool.
cover up for your eyes. So try using your phone with that. So thanks again, and
thank you. Thank you.